the only way farm workers gain the right to have a union, the way that many of the rest of us have unions, is through state legislation. So, but one thing to think about, because so many of you are members of SEIU and are public employees, right? Mm-hmm. The same holds true for public employees. So in some parts of this country, public employees do not have the right to organize and bargain. So what we just saw in West Virginia, those workers do not have the right to bargain a contract. And if you look at what they did, the teachers in West Virginia, and you look at what the farm workers did, there's a lot of similarities, right? They built this movement around making a moral stand for their right to band together and make things better. And they moved public support and worked really hard to gain sort of the moral high ground. So it's interesting, right? Because they did have a union, but they only had a union because they made a union. There was no structure for them to have a union.
I think that's a good segue into what I was thinking about the movie. Couldn't put it into just one word, so I didn't yell anything out. But one of the things that struck us sitting here was when they said after 10 years, blah 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 blah, they finally got the union. I'm like, oh my God, 10 years. I'm like, I was pretty active in the union, very involved for, I don't know, 6, 8, 10, maybe 10. And I was going like, okay, some time for somebody else to kind of take over. I'll pass on the baton and let somebody else work on it. I'll stay involved, but not as active. And I think like, here's Dolores, who's 87 years old and still going like, no. And that what got me, the picture of the same stuff that was 40, 50 years later, just resurfacing and having you always got to fight the tiger. You always got to fight the fight. And I think that's what kind of got to me, was that not only did it take 10 years, but now 30, 40 years after that, we're doing the same thing. We're having to deal with the same situations with different players all over again.
So I think the other thing that was very brief in that movie, but it sort of triggered something around the civil rights movement, around Rosa Parks, because people often say, Rosa Parks got tired one day and she sat down on the bus. And that's not what happened, right? She went through a lot of training at the Highlander Center. They were very prepared for what Rosa Parks did. In this movie, you saw Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta sitting down with Fred Ross. Well, Fred Ross was a major organizer in California, and he taught organizing to people. It was something people learned, and that's what they were doing with Fred Ross. They were learning how to organize. Now, they were very talented organizers, but they got a lot of that. It wasn't just like they came up with this. They went through a process of learning how to organize.
So I wanted to pick up on the comment about the continuing internal battle that you were having about socioeconomic justice, because I think talking about the intersectionality of
Don't go there. Part of it, or maybe let's go there.
Social justice is a big part of that, is socioeconomic justice. And one of the quandaries I have about the state of America today is that we have a large portion of our population speaking out that's the base for the Trump vote, that is angry and disenfranchised because of their socioeconomic oppression and the loss of jobs and the insecurities. And my wondering is there a way to merge their socioeconomic justice with those of these other? Why does it have to be racial? Why can't we merge together and address all social justice at the socioeconomic level without race as part of the coloring?
Oh, because then the color is red. There's such a trick about, well, if you don't believe that somebody should go ahead and be able to work hard and get rich, even if it's on somebody else's hard work, then you're communist. And that got leveled at her, it got leveled at Cesar, it's been leveled at anybody who tries to change the socioeconomic situation. Yeah, and it happened within the unions during the McCarthy era. The unions threw out their more radical leaders. A lot of them, not all of them, not all of them. Some of the unions got thrown out of other unions for not throwing out their radical leaders. UAW comes to mind. So that's part of what we face. I'd also like to address a certain slip, which Freudian, however it may have been, was actually useful. Sexuality. When they start talking about Dolores' 11 children, what are they saying? She's sexual. Women aren't supposed to be. No, sorry. Or you're not the sex you were born, or you're not sleeping with the right sex, or whatever. Sex becomes part of the whole intersectionality, intersexuality discussion too. Or you're female, you're not male. Or you're male, you're not female. You have no right to speak to this. Any way that can split us, and who's they? Who's they? The people who are doing best.
Big business.
Big business.
I think big
Whoever's
business is
doing
really
well right now is the they, you know, and whoever benefits from splitting the rest of us. So that's always, I think, what to look for when the message is coming down that the Mexicans are taking our jobs, or the blacks are taking our jobs, or the refugees are taking our jobs and ruining the economy. Who's winning? That's, I think, always the question to ask. My turn.
Yeah,
See,
mine was
you
kind
and
of
I.
right there with that, is, what we're really dealing with is the haves and have-nots. And
Right.
the ones that have are very successful at pitting us against each other for whatever reason that they want to choose. They can just spark it really quick like that with just a nice little comment. Similar as my boss did with my Brea situation. I mean, they have the ability with that money, that almighty dollar that we're striving for, that we all need to get by. They can dangle that in front of us like a little carrot, and they can pit us against each other. And they're very successful at it, and somehow we have to combat that.
So one of the things that was a theme in the movie was that organizing is important, but unless you vote, the organizing doesn't carry the weight and it doesn't follow through. And so I think that's an important part of, if only 1% of America is at the very top with all the money, and we all voted in the same way, we could certainly have powerful change to influence the betterment for all good.
That was Virginia. That was the story of Virginia. The story of Virginia was not about being chosen, but realizing that you had the power. And that's what you saw, were people that just came out from nowhere. And it was really remarkable. Also the story in Alabama with black women that really sort of led that fight. More than anyone even quite comprehends unless you're on the ground down there. And that was their power.
And
all
perhaps
the money in the
yesterday in
world couldn't
Pennsylvania.
take that power away from them, which made them so much more powerful, which made it so exciting, and we're seeing that in Parkland right now. That's their power. You can't threaten them, you can't take their job away, you can't do anything. And they're totally intimidating the NRA, because the NRA thinks they have power, and they're proving they don't.
And the youth are our future voters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Put something in this room here. One factor I felt was pretty powerful in the movie was the concept of poverty. They were not ashamed of being poor, and they said that multiple times, different people. And even Dolores made a point of being down there with her people and struggling right along with her people, and made her the powerful leader. Because the other two guys who were head of the union, they didn't make a movie about them. So the fact that she took that cross and she bared that cross for all of us is like amazing. So poverty should not be looked on as an issue too. like even, you know, like some of us, you know, we talk about, you know, the brown person, the black person, the ignorant person, you know, the poor person, you know, have rights and equality just as long as all of us do. And they have their place with all of us. And I thought that was amazing that she was not ashamed of being poor. And that gave her kind of an edge.
This gentleman over here.
So I'm like Janet, and I got involved in the Partners Union when I was a freshman in college. And, the microphone. But so what I'm thinking about is that, well, we talked about the importance of voting, and obviously voting is important, but their power didn't come from the vote. And I bet many of them didn't have the right to vote. And they were poor, so their power didn't come from money. So when we talk about organizing, we've got to talk and understand how they understood their own power and how they used it. Initially, their power as workers, and that was the power to strike. And the fact that they were willing to strike against great risks, knowing that they might get beaten up, they might get assaulted, they might lose their jobs, they might lose their homes, and all these other things, and yet they organized collectively and took action. And then the other thing that they realized as the union went on a little bit more was that they could use the power of organized consumers. And that's where the boycott came from. And that's not a casual thing. I mean, it's one thing to say, there's a difference between saying I'm avoiding shopping in certain places or I'm avoiding buying certain products because I don't like the company that made them versus a boycott where you've got to be out there week after week after week after week after week reminding people, because as soon as you're not there, they think the boycott is over and they're back buying Gallo wine and back buying grapes and not looking for the union label on the iceberg lettuce. But they figured out how to do that, and they invested the resources into making it possible. It wasn't the law that gave them that. The law was not on their side, and law enforcement was not on their side. The power structure was not on their side. They found the way. They found where the power was, and were able to use that to tilt the situation in the other direction, so that the law had to change in order to meet their demands.
I find it kind of interesting, even now, she's not listed in the history books. They don't talk about her in school, even now. I found that was very powerful, how much she devoted her life, and it's glossed over. I did find that pretty interesting in the movie.
There's somebody at the top.
My name is Diana Richard, and I'm with SEA. I've been with SEA since about 2003. And for all of the problems that are still going on in this country, now 50 years later, is embarrassing. And with all of the problems that we have, even in law enforcement, and now we have a president and we've got a bunch of politicians that are doing everything in their power to get rid of unions. If all of the unions in this country decided to organize together, there's more of us than there is of the politicians. And if we march on the streets of every capital in this country, there would be more of us out there. And even the police have their own unions. So do they decide to march with us, or do they decide that their job is to keep control of the crowds? Now, we can march peacefully and not cause any problems, but just give this country the awareness that there's more of us than there is of them. And 50 years later, all of these issues should not still be on the forefront. They should have been taken care of decades ago. But yet, we still have all these silos of all the unions instead of just compiling us all together and organizing together. And marching on the streets, we're doing nothing but sitting around just letting all of this happen. And it's not going to change until we decide that this is what we need to do for our rights, for getting rid of racism, making everybody equal in this country. We were all immigrants. The only ones that were here before us were the Indians. And look at what we've done to them. They now have sections of land throughout this country where they are allowed to live. And even then, they're still getting pushed around and bullied. So until we decide to compile ourselves all together and show who's boss in this country, this is just going to keep on happening.
Thank you for that. And your comment about her erasure in history is really compelling for me too, because I think that what I'm hearing is that the organization, coming together, breaking down these false divisions and false barriers, but it's also about narrative. And we are taught and told a dominant narrative over and over and over again, and it's only on occasions like these when you get to hear a counter narrative or a different story. And I think that's a big part of the movement too, is that we have to get out there and tell our own stories. And I think there was a quote in the movie that said, you can either use memory for enslavement or memory for emancipation. And I think that that's something that we should be thinking about. Also, it's protest, physical protest, getting out on the streets the way, the old-fashioned way, but it's also social media and how we can use social media to tell our stories and come together and break down the barriers. I think is really important, something to consider.
I think it was very interesting to note that the union grape growers for years with very little effect, and then they figured out they needed to change strategy. And I think that's another thing that we need to look at as activists. What works? What reaches the people we need to reach? Striking, marching in Southern California, it didn't matter to the growers. They could find other people. What hurt them? People not buying their stuff. And in the same way, we need to think about if we want to make a change, if we want to especially force power to change, we have to face power where it's making its base. So whatever that means. Social media, honestly, if I were a big businessman, I wouldn't care what people are saying on social media as long as they keep buying my stuff and hating the people I tell them to hate. So we can look at that. Wide open, the people that we want to change or the behaviors we want to change, what is reinforcing that behavior? What is rewarding those people who are doing that? How can we stop that reward from coming to them? Because that's the only way we make a change. I only make a change when things hurt enough that I'm willing to make a change. So we have to, I'm not going to diet until I'm too miserable in my own way to stay the way I do. So, same thing there. They're only going to go on a diet of power when power stops feeling so good.
Yeah.